Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Testing Trailblazers, How Digital Winners Addressed Automation. Before we begin, I'd like to cover 3 housekeeping items for our viewers. First, at the bottom of your audience console, you'll find a number of widgets for questions and additional resources. When you have questions for the presenter during the webinar, click on the Q&A widget and submit your question. We'll answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation, and if we run out of time, we will get back to you via email. Second, if you need any tech support during the webinar, please use the help option. Third and finally, a copy of today's slide deck is available in the resources section at the bottom of your screen. We will also email you a link to the recording of this webinar within the next few hours. With that, I will introduce our presenter for today, Johnny Lamb, Director of Global Solutions Engineering here at Perfecto by Perforce. Johnny, thank you for joining us on today's webinar.
Hey, Shelby. Thank you for giving us the intro. So let's get started. So we have quite a few things we want to cover today, but really we want to talk about how digital winners are addressing automation. All right, so we're going to focus on a few things. We're going to talk about, first of all, what are the common test automation challenges that we see across a lot of our customer and some of the prospect we talk to. We're going to talk about how teams overcome them. And last but not least, we're going to go over some real world examples of how testing teams are overcoming such issues and challenges. All right, a little bit about myself. I have been in the test automation space pretty much my entire career. I've been with Perfecto and Perforce for quite a few years, and right now, most of my day, what I do is that I talk to a lot of prospects, talk to a lot of customers, and listen to some of their challenges and see what Perfecto can do to help them. All right, so diving into our agenda, what we see across a lot of the customers we talk to, and this is true across not just the enterprise, but also in the SMB market as well, is that we see that a lot of industries are undergoing what we call like a digital transformation. And in particular, we highlight, for example, in the banking industry, a lot of folks are slowly moving away from brick and mortar, going in branches to accessing their bank account online, whether it's through a web browser or whether it's through, let's say, a native app or any other digital assets that you might have to engage with your end customer. And we see that this is only accelerating. So a lot of times when we talk to folks in the banking sector or the finance sector, they're describing to us that they're not keeping up with the demand of their customers. So when we talk to business, they tell us that, hey, we want to release new innovation so that we are first to market on a lot of new things. Things like, for example, not too long ago, we see that folks are starting to deposit their checks online through a native application rather than going in the bank. Back then, there were quite a few firms that were first to launch, and they managed to capture quite a significant amount of market share by having some of these features. Another, quite a few things that we also seen, things like, let's say, enhanced security through logging in through Face ID or Touch ID or biometric, two-factor authentication, but there's many, many innovations in the banking sector, which now if you open up a banking application, those are kind of table stakes in the game now. So we do see that folks that do it well, enterprise that adopt it well and are able to keep up with the demand and what our customers are asking for, they're thriving in the industry. Whereas we do see that in some cases, when they're not doing it well, there could be a significant challenges facing that firm. Now, the challenge in all of this is that everyone wants better quality, better innovation, push things to the market faster. Now, however, what we do see is that this actually puts a tremendous risk and tremendous impact into your development team, especially when it comes to quality assurance. Now, we see that a lot of folks, they spend a lot of time trying to get it right, but it's a very, very challenging task. And when we do see that firms that don't get it right, what we do see is that their digital channels aren't really converting for them. Folks aren't really using their applications. They're not getting, let's say, transactions completed on their, let's say, online or native application. And in some cases, when it's really, really bad, let's say there's performance issues, all sorts of issues on different platforms, there's no adoption altogether. So that's a huge challenge, which we see that a lot of folks are trying to overcome. And we did a study So this is one of the things that we found is that a lot of CEOs, they do expect that the sector they're working in, that they play in, there's going to be substantially transformed by the innovation of digital. So folks that are doing this well will thrive, and folks that are struggling on this, we see that in many cases their market share is diminished. All right, so let's take a deeper dive. We're going to talk about what are the specific challenges that pretty much any delivery shop are facing at the moment. And I like to start off by pointing you towards our pipeline. So in the bottom, what you're seeing is a typical software development pipeline. Whether it's waterfall, whether it's agile, but the gist of it is that you have to go through a few phases. You have your planning phase, you do your development coding phase, you build, compile, and then you test it, and then you run it in production. Now, every shop that we talk to, they all want to do 4 things really well. First of all, on top, you see that they want to improve their innovation throughput because business is demanding for more and more new features. On top of that, they do want to release these new innovation while quality is kept in mind. So not only are they innovating, but in terms of the quality of the releases, it's relatively bug-free. We don't have any, let's say, showstoppers, blockers, or anything like that on any digital platform that they release on. And while we do this, we also want to improve in our turnaround time. So it used to be, let's say, 1 release a year back then in the desktop days where we still ship, let's say, CDs out to your clients. But nowadays, it's gone from, let's say, once a year to quarterly, in let's say the web age, and now in the mobile age, we're talking about agile, ad hoc delivery, ad hoc, let's say, deployment of new applications. So everyone wants to get it done faster so that they can push things out in smaller incremental bites. And last but not least, they have to operate within a certain budget. So we all understand that not only do we have to go faster, innovate more, and sustain quality, but we got to do it so that in a way that we don't blow up our budget. Now, all said and done, if everything is smooth and everything is working according to plan, you're going to end up with like a 5-star experience. So this is kind of the ideal state that everyone is striving to get to. So you want to go for your software development. You have your planning sessions with your product teams, your business teams. You code with your R&D and development team. You start building it with your DevOps team. You test it through embedding, let's say, QA and automation within your team. And when you run in production, you should have ideally no bug leaked into production. And anything that is executed in production, there should be monitors that tell you if anything is going wrong. But the end state is that you're striving for that 5-star experience for your customer. Now, however, we do notice that quite a few things, especially when it comes to quality assurance, we're always limited by the number of resources, whether it's time, whether it's people, or whether it's how many, let's say, devices or platform we have access to. So what ends up happening is that we see a lot of teams, they take a risk-based approach when it comes to testing. Now, what you're seeing here is what we call our quality cube. But this quality cube, what you're seeing is on x-axis is kind of the different platforms that you have to test on. Now, for example, if you're releasing an application, let's say you're releasing a banking application, chances are you might have, let's say, an Android native application, an iOS native application, a responsive web application which runs on both desktop and mobile platform. So it's the same application that you're launching. That in itself, there's quite a few different platforms that you're releasing it to. And on top of that, there are additional complexity when it comes to mobile. So when we talk about Android, typically we see that for an enterprise customer that, let's say, supports your bring your own device, we're talking about at least anywhere between 15 to 24 device. That will cover roughly 50 to 80% of their customer. And we see that that's true across all the geographical regions that we serve in. So whether it's, let's say, North America, whether it's Asia, whether it's Europe, you name it, across the globe, we see that typically between 15 to 24 device. That is a good representation of your customer. Now, on top of that, once you layer in your test case on your y-axis, you see that the same test case that you're testing, not only does it have to work on one single platform, but now you have to make sure that it works across all these other different platforms that you're supporting. Whether it's variations of legacy Android to latest iOS devices, your desktop browsers such as Safari, Chrome, Firefox, Edge, you name it. But these have to work seamless across all these different platforms that your customer might be engaging you with. Now you see that this is a simple test case. Let's say we have, for simplicity's sake, let's say we have 10 test cases. If you have to validate 10 test cases across, let's say, 15 platforms, that greatly multiplies the amount of effort that you have to go through in order to validate that is working. Now, you see that this is a cube. There's a third dimension to this. It's because when it comes to mobile, there's other factors which adds on to that complexity. Now we talk about, let's say, how does your application perform under different network, whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5G network condition. How does it perform if there's different background running applications? How is it different when it's, let's say, in, Toronto, Canada versus in New York, New Jersey in the States? Like those are the things like, for example, and on top of that, orientation, landscape, or portrait, those are the things that will give your end user a slightly different experience. So when you factor that into account, now this is a 10 simple test case that we have. We're not only testing this across multiple platforms, but we're also extending the complexity. So that's another multiple that you have to be aware of when you're going through your regression. So as you can see, because most teams, they don't have resources to do all of this, what ends up happening is that we take a risk-based approach. So they pick and choose which ones are important. So for example, the bottom left quadrant, those are the things that you would test on. Whereas the rest of the quadrants that you see, you're basically taking a spot check approach to make sure like that nothing is broken. And what ends up happening is that for those areas where you're not testing on, chances are there might be a bug that is leaked into production. All right, and so we see this pretty often. And what happens is that if we look at these red patches, these are the areas that we're not testing on. And if a bug does appear in one of those spots, what's going to happen is that we're introducing a bug into our software pipeline. All right, so you see now our perfect software delivery pipeline. Now we have bugs. Hopefully, most of them are caught in the test phase. But some of them, if they do leak into production, it's going to do a lot of harm. It's going to slow down your pipeline. So what ends up happening is, first of all, once you have these bugs, your customers won't be happy. So for example, let's say your banking application, you just upgraded to the latest iOS 13. That's going to be launched very, very soon. And it's not working on your device for whatever reason. So you're not going to be happy about it. Chances are you're going to probably go on their app review and leave a poor review and say that, hey, for whatever reason, my banking application used to work on my legacy iPhone is not working on my latest iPhone. So that in turn will cause a little bit of issue in terms of your customer sentiment. They're not going to be happy, and we see this all the time. So here's an example, and if you typically go through an app review, you'll see that it's typically littered with all these, let's say, negative comments. And a lot of these could be avoided if you have the right resource and you have, let's say, the right amount of coverage. So you're testing on all the platforms that matter to your customer. And we see this a lot. We see comments about, let's say, hey, for whatever reason, check deposit is not working on my latest iPhone. Or for whatever reason, biometric is not working when I try to log in through my Samsung Galaxy Fold device. So a lot of these things are displayed in the App Store. And there's nowhere to hide because these are publicly distributed. So everyone can see, and in some cases, if the App Store review is really that bad, that's going to affect the amount of customer you can retain or the amount of customer that will sign on to your platform. All right, so going back to our pipeline, now we have bugs. Another thing that happened is that now that you have bugs, you're going to assess it. And once it's go for an assessment, it's going to start competing with your new innovations. Because not only can you spend now that you can't spend all your time on new innovation, you have to start spending a portion of that time on backlog. So it's going to compete with your innovation. Now that you're spending, let's say, 10, 20, 30, 40, and I've seen shops which they spend upwards of 80, 90% of their time on backlog. And that is going to suffocate what you're able to deliver. And that's not going to work well for your business. So what happens is that we see that these bottlenecks start to occur because now your developers are taking off their new innovation, the new features that they're working on, and now they're focusing on fixing these bugs and defects that are found in the previous sprint cycle. Now, we'll see that what we typically find is that it's going to slow down your pipeline. And in this image, you see that it's kind of like having plaque in your pipeline. It's slowing down the number of innovations you can go through within a single sprint cycle. Now, we've done a study, and we've actually done a study with one of the banks in the States. And what they found is that the earlier they can find these bugs, the cheaper it is to fix. And it's pretty intuitive. You can think about it. Let's say, for example, if you develop your code and you compile it, you check it in, you do a pull request, and it's building. If you find it early in the dev or the builds phase, it's very, very easy for a developer to fix it right at the source and not worry about, let's say, working on something else. There's no context switch that they're going through when they find it really early in the cycle. Now, if you build it and it leaks into, let's say, your QA environment, your testing phase, if we catch it, it's still good. However, because now you're going back and forth between an automation engineer, a QA engineer, and also your developers, we see that according to this bank, they did a study, it takes about 8 times the amount of resource, whether it's a people, process, dollar time, to fix this bug. So it's 8x more expensive compared to finding the defect early in the code and the build phase. Now, what you don't want to do is you don't want to find this in production. So if it leaks into production and someone is complaining about it, what we find out is that most teams would put together, let's say, a squad to take a look at it. So a squad might include, let's say, a DevOps engineer, a QA analyst, an automation engineer, a few developers. You put together a squad, and what they do for the next couple of days is really to try and pinpoint what that issue is and try and fix it. And when we do find it in production and that many folks are involved, we're talking about an 86 multiplier in terms of the cost to fix the issue. So whether it's, let's say, the time it takes or whether it's the resource it takes, it's significantly more expensive if you find it and it leaks all the way to production. All right, so a lot of challenges. What are the digital winners doing differently? Now, the digital winners are doing 3 things uniquely, and they're accelerating really, really well in these 3 areas. Now, the first thing that they do is, instead of, let's say, manual testing, they're heavily relying on automation. So they're moving from manual to automation, and they're doing certain things really, really well. First of all, they have trusted, dependable automation that pass typically 90+% of the time. Second thing that they're doing is now they have automation. You have upwards of, let's say, 80 to 90% plus coverage in your automation, and they're passing 80 plus 90+% rate. The next thing they do is they execute this at scale and early as often. So they execute this, first of all, across as many platforms as possible. And typically what they do is that they would take a look at their analytics and they pick a point. Normally, most shops that are doing this well, they would pick a point 80+% of their customers. And they choose, let's say, in this case, if they're releasing on mobile and web, 80+% of their customer might represent, let's say, anywhere between 16 to 24 devices. Now, they're going to execute all of this automation on 16 to 24 devices. And at the same time, they're executing this as early as often. So early in the cycle, whenever, let's say, you have a pull request, they would execute a sanity or smoke test on a subset of that 24 devices. And then scheduled every day, they would, let's say, on a 2-hour basis, they would run a sanity smoke where it has a little bit more of the critical use cases in that compared to smoke, but they'll aim to get a feedback within no more than 30 minutes. And last but not least, once a day or once a night, they're going to execute all their regression test case across all the platforms and all the devices to make sure that there's no defects that are being leaked into other platforms. All right, so that's a lot of automation and that's a lot of execution. So the last thing that they do really, really, really well is really when you have upwards of thousands, if not tens of thousands of execution a day, they can go through and analyze those really quickly. So of those, let's say 5 to 10% of test cases that are failing, they have a way of cut through all of those failure reasons and find out what is noise and what is actually a defect that could be introduced by the last couple or last couple pull requests that the developers have made. All right, so at Perfecto, we do this a lot. And one thing that we did is we came up with a benchmark. And what we found is that across all of our customer base, we can group our customers into 5 phases of what we call our quality maturity index. And this is typically a journey. So a lot of our customer is in some point of time in one of these phases. But when you break it down, really it depends on what your end goal is. So in this case, most customers that we talk to, they're either trying to, let's say, improve their release velocity, improve their quality, or in some case, just have better, minimize the risk when it comes to release. But when we break out these phases, really when we measure this out, this is kind of what they're mostly asking for. Phase 1 is kind of when you're starting off with your automation. And if you want to achieve, let's say, a feedback window. So if you want to release on let's say, a 3 to 6 month window, so we're talking about 2 to 4 release a year. These are kind of the things that we see that they're doing. And we broke it into 4 segments, which we measure. So the first thing that we measure is a platform coverage, like how many platforms are they executing their automation on. The second part is of that regression or the sanity suite that they have, what % of that is fully automated? All right, and the third one that we see is what is their stability of their automation? And last but not least, we also focus and take a look at what are some of the quality gates that they go through. All right, so if we look at phase 1, for example, this is a brand new, let's say, customer just starting off in their automation journey. What we do find is that most of them, they would test on at most one of each platform. So we're talking about, let's say, one Android, one iOS, and maybe one browser, and typically it's on Chrome. They're going to have very minimal automation. So you're talking about, let's say, if you have 100 test cases in your regression, at most, they're just starting off. So they have no more than 5 to 10 test cases that are automated. In terms of the stability, this is still something that is a work in progress. So they haven't figured out the process. And at most, you're seeing that these test cases are somewhat in development phase. So they're not very stable. A lot of them are failing when, let's say, any changes are introduced. So they're not getting a lot of, or in this case, a high pass rate when it comes to automation. And when you look at their quality gates, there's, again, a work in progress. But what they're focused on is really testing as needed. They're not testing, let's say, all of your regression, but most of the time they would only do it, let's say, at the end of their sprint cycle. But the majority of work is kind of ad hoc. So they're only testing on new features that are being introduced. All right, so as we graduate and we slowly move across this the quality index, you see that new customer that are starting off in their automation journey, that's kind of how we see them. And that's kind of how, what kind of like result you get in terms of release velocity. If you have that type of symptom, typically you would release no more than 2 to 4 times a year. All right, so as we gradually migrate through it, you see that most customers that we talk to are kind of in the phase 2 to the phase 4 phase. A lot of them have some sort of automation. They're working to improve on this. But the idea behind this is that the better, let's say, the better you get covering your platforms that your customer are testing on, the more robust your automation is in terms of pass rate, the higher % of, let's say, use cases that you automate, and the more quality gates that you embed. What that translates into for your business is really the ability to release faster with better quality. So folks that tell us that, hey, we're moving from, let's say, monthly releases to biweekly to eventually ad hoc or daily as needed, really there's a lot of things that a lot of ingredients that have to be in place for them to move towards that end state. All right, so let's do a double click on this. we'll introduce this quality coverage cube that we've talked about a little. Folks that are starting off or struggling, they stick with a risk-based approach. So there's typically a lot of reasons for this. Sometimes it might be, let's say, environmental issues, test data issues, stability issues with, let's say, their automation framework. But there's all sorts of issues which resulted in this risk-based approach. Digital winners that are releasing on a daily basis or like a bi-weekly basis, if you look at their coverage cube, this is kind of what you should expect. They're testing across all the important platforms. They're testing across all the important test cases, and they're covering all three dimensions, not only happy path, but also what happens if, let's say, there's a degraded network, or what happens on let's say, a 4-free 2G connection, what happens when it's landscape versus a portrait. And by having that kind of robust coverage, what that allows them to do is that there's not going to be a lot of defects leak in production. So in terms of their delivery pipeline, a lot of it is really working on new innovation, and typically we see that no more than 20% of their time is focused on backlog. Now, another thing that they do is they want to introduce a lot more automation at scale, and they want to do this as quickly as possible. So what we do see is that typically there are quite a few quality gates that digital winners are embedding within their pipeline. We typically see a smoke test suite that normally executes within a 5 to 10 minute window on every single pull request. So we're talking about, let's say, for example, it's not uncommon that a banking customer that we work with will have upwards of, let's say, dozens, if not hundreds of developers. And for them all to collaborate and not to step on each other's toes, they need a way to validate that the pieces of code they check in, they are all right. And we do see that it's not uncommon that you have upwards of, let's say, 10, 20, 30, 50 pull requests a day. And for every single one of those pull requests, they need to have some sort of smoke tests or sanity tests in place in order to make sure that they're not checking in anything bad. Now, winners, what they're doing is that it's typically a lot of executions, a lot of test cases they have to go through, and they don't have a lot of time. So what they're doing is that instead of running this sequentially, they're starting to scale. And the way they're scaling is by running these tests in parallel. So rather than, let's say, running tests 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, one after another, they typically have, let's say, 6 devices or 6 platforms all running one test case in parallel to minimize on that feedback loop so we can get back to that sweet spot, which is no more than 5 to 10 minutes. All right, last but not least, when it comes to their feedback window, a huge portion of that time is really spent on how do we look at all the failures and sort through that noise. So we've done a study and we looked at all the data points that we have, and we see that if we let's say break out all the failure reasons, typically it falls in one of 4 buckets. So it could be, let's say, an environmental issue, it could be an actual defect, it could be a test issue, or it could be, let's say, a stability issue with your test data or issues with your test data. But what we found is that of all these reasons, really what we're interested in is really those real application defects. And we found that for most of the customers that we work with, by analyzing their data, about no more than 4% of all failures end up being an actual application defect. So now you think about, let's say, if you have 100 test cases and 90% of them are passing, you still have to go through 10 test cases every morning and run them one by one or look at the stack trace to figure out why they're failing. And if you look at what digital winners are doing differently is that they're leveraging a lot of ways to optimize and to minimize that time every morning when it comes to analyzing their failure reasons. So, for example, this is actually an insurance company that we're talking to in Canada. And before having Perfecto, what they described to us is that on a day-to-day basis for a developer, or in this case, an automation engineer, they spend almost half a day. So every day from 9 a.m. all the way till 2 p.m., that is spent on really what we call backlog, evaluating failure test cases, rerunning those test cases, looking at stack traces. But they're spending a ton of time In fact, more than half their time is spent on doing this. So when it comes to actual development and new innovation, in this case, scripting new automation, they're really left with only a few hours a day in order to get that done. So winners, what they're doing differently is they deploy certain methodologies. In this case, they could be doing, for example, leveraging a smart platform that can automatically group these failure reasons for you. Or they could be optimizing on the way of how they go through their failure test cases, whether it's through leveraging insights, whether it's through leveraging, let's say, heat maps, or whether it's leveraging common failure reasons. There's many ways of what they're doing, of how they're doing it. But ultimately, what ends up happening is that they're spending no more than a small fraction of their day, typically no more than half an hour to 1 hour of their day, evaluating these failure reasons and sorting them out, figuring out which one are actual application defects, and fixing up the failed test cases as needed. So there's quite a few nuggets in there in terms of how digital winners are approaching these issues. But in summary, really going back to our slide in here, slide number 14. Really, when we look at what is the end state and when we talk to a lot of our customers, they're somewhere along this journey, and typically they have an end in mind. So a lot of times we talk to a customer and they tell us something along the lines of, hey, let's say we're releasing on a quarterly basis and we want to get to a bi-weekly release. So what we do at Perfecto is that we go through a few things. We have a team in the field, our solutions engineer will work with our customer to figure out, let's say, what are some of the pain points, what are some of the challenges, but more importantly, in terms of the spectrum of these metrics, like where are they in their current state? So go through an exercise of looking at, for example, like what % of your customer platform are you covering in your current state? And what do you need to be at in order to get to your future state? So if they're in phase 2 and they're planning to move to phase 4, we know that we need to increase their coverage from, let's say, testing on 15 to 30% of their customer, which is typically 4 to 6 device, to 16 to 24 device in phase 4. Now we'll go through this exercise with them. We'll go through, let's say, their coverage, what they're testing on. We'll also look at their automation use cases. So we'll go through their regression and we'll figure out what % of those test cases can be automated on Perfecto's platform. And typically when we go through that exercise, we find that with Perfecto, especially with our additional IP, we're able to automate a lot more of their use case when it comes to just using open source. For example, it's not uncommon that if we look at a traditional, let's say, a shop that leverages open source with Appium, most of the time they describe to us that they can get no more than 50 to 60% automation. And when we dive deeper through a workshop, what we find is that we can get their automation % up from 50 to 60% to all the way to 80 to 90%. Now, these would be things such as, for example, some of the advanced use cases that they didn't think they could automate. Now, going back to the banking example, let's say check capture is important to them. Traditionally, what they would do is they would perform those use cases and all of those associated test cases manually. And with Perfecto, because we have, in this case, on top of Appium, we have our image check capture and the image injection capability, we're able to automate these use cases. And in turn, what that means for our end customers is that they can push from, let's say, 50 to 60% automation upwards of 70, 80, 90% automation. Another common use case that we hear a lot across all the industry, biometric login. Most of the time, they don't do that or they do it manually. However, with Perfecto, we do have that capability. And once again, by having this Face ID, Touch ID automation capability, we're able to automate that part as well. And again, increasing their automation percentage. But ultimately, what we're really after is for digital winners, we want to shoot for this 75% or 75 to 80% plus in terms of how many test cases that they're automating. Because we know that the more they're automating, the less they're doing manually, and the faster they're able to go through the regression cycle. All right, the third one is a little bit more tricky. Sometimes when we inspect any existing automation, what we find is that we'll hear a lot of folks tell us that, yeah, they have automation, but when we dive deeper into it, they're not showing the full picture. So they might have automation, but they're running it, let's say, once a week, or at most, let's say, twice a week. And what we're finding is that when you're not running them frequently, it's typically tied hand to hand. You also see that the flakiness of their tests or the stability of the tests tend to be on the low end. So some customers we talk to, they have some automation, but at most they're passing no more than 50, 60% of their time, especially when it comes to UI-based end-to-end automation, which are really prone to a lot of changes. So anything that changes on the UI would break their tests. So what we find in this space is that, again, we'll go through with our solutions engineering team. We'll sit with them, evaluate their use cases, but we'll identify which one of these test cases are flaky. And we'll spend some time with them and put together a program to get them back on track. So at the end of the engagement, what we typically find is that we're able to, typically this is within days and weeks. We're not talking about months or years, but within days and weeks, we're able to get their automation back to a good, healthy 80+% passing state. All right, last but not least, and this is probably the most difficult one to overcome, is how do we start making this a part of their process? The first thing we typically work with is we want to get automation as part of CI. So we want to start establishing these quality gates as early in the cycle as possible. So what we always recommend, and depending on the customer, is we always recommend starting off with a little bit of automation, starting off with a smoke test suite, but make sure it's stable, make sure it's passing all the time, and make sure it covers all the critical flows. We'll work off that, but eventually what you want to do is you want to start incorporating additional quality gates, sanity and overnight regression. But we'll work, again, our solutions engineering team, along with our professional service team and our TAM team, we'll work alongside the customer to figure out what is their end state and deploy a blueprint in order to get them from their current state to their desired end state. Most of the time, we will establish multiple quality gates within that process. And all said and done, most customers that have gone through the process with Perfecto, we're able to move the needle for them. So we're able to get them from, let's say, phase 1 or phase 2 to phase 3 or phase 4. And in some cases, if they're really, really important, the application has to deliver on a daily basis. We work with them to move towards a phase 5 state. All right, so that concludes our quick webinar for today. Thank you all for tuning in. I will, I guess, open the forum for any questions.
Sure. The first question from the audience asks, I'm in the banking industry and there are a lot of regulations. Does Perfecto work well with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for the question. The answer is yes. We do work with a lot of the financial institution and banking customers. In fact, I think we work with, forgot the numbers off the top of my head, but majority of the banking customers are using Perfecto. And one of the things that we do find that is unique in the financial sector is security is very, very important, especially when it comes to, let's say, deploying a cloud vendor within the banking sector. Things that your security team would look at are, are we, let's say, for example, SOC 2 compliant? Can we do private dedicated devices? Those sort of things. So with Perfecto, we play really well in that segment. And because of that, because we hold our security standards really, really high, we're able to provide you a dedicated cloud. A lot of banking customers across the globe, and not just in North America, rely on Perfecto to do their testing. Most customers in the banking sector, what they aim for is we would start off with doing their UAT testing, but eventually when they do see results, customer will start shifting left and right. So they use Perfecto in, let's say, production monitoring, and some would also use Perfecto early in the cycle for, let's say, dev testing, unit testing, any testing that requires, let's say, a mobile device or like a desktop, a web platform.
Awesome. The next question asks, we are an Appium shop and there are limitations to what we can automate. How is Perfecto different?
Mm-hmm. Another great question. I briefly described it earlier on. Appium shops, typically it's very easy to plug in your existing Appium framework into Perfecto. And what we do gain by doing so is not only are we 100% Appium compliant, but we also provide you additional, what we call enterprise Appium capabilities. So I named a few, like Face ID, Touch ID, image injection, GPS spoofing, network virtualization. There's a lot of these additional capabilities that we provide out of the box, which allows you to automate more of your use cases. So again, we are fully Appium compliant. So in different languages, like Java, JavaScript, Ruby, anything that Appium, Selenium, or Remote WebDriver supports, we'll be able to support as well.
Great. The next question asks, we need devices locally to connect to our Bluetooth-enabled IoT device. Does Perfecto do on-premise?
Mm-hmm. Great question. The answer is yes. We do have a lot of these. Actually, we talk to a lot of customers where they have very, very advanced setup. So, for example, we're working with a medical device manufacturer at the moment. And what they do is like they have hearing aid devices. So they have hearing aid devices. The hearing aid has to pair via Bluetooth to all sorts of Android and iOS devices. And what we do here in Perfecto is that we do provide you what we call a hybrid deployment, where you can hook up your local device to the Perfecto lab. And because they're local to, let's say, your office, typically either in a data center or maybe an office setup, we're able to locate those devices close to your IoT device to do that Bluetooth pairing. And once that is connected, then you can control the devices through traditional automation, and you can complete those end-to-end scenario by having that set up. And we're quite flexible. I think the hearing aid was one example. We also work with, let's say, glucose monitors, cardiac erect IoT devices. We work with, let's say, car headboards, but all sorts of, let's say, IoT devices we work with. And most of the time, these are custom to the client. So if you do have something custom, we recommend you have a chat with one of our solutions engineering team, and we'll be happy to discuss what are some of the things that we can support.
All right, and I think the last question that we'll have time for is, it's a challenge managing and maintaining tests. How can Perfecto help?
Mm-hmm. There's quite a few things that we can help on. I think I introduced the three concepts earlier on, like high percent of automation, starting their execution. But last but not least, it's also the analytics part. So at Perfecto, we have invested in a reporting and analytics dashboard. So out of the box, once you hook up your automation, you have a few things that will help you in the triage process and the debugging process when you do have failing test cases. So things like heat map will automatically sort your failing test cases into different buckets. On top of that, we do have a machine learning algorithm running in the background. So we're able to sort the failure reasons based on stack traces into buckets. So common failures, if you're, let's say, for example, if you're running a Selenium or Appium test case and a common failure is element not found, that is something that our algorithm is smart enough to detect. So when you do have, let's say, multiple test cases that are failing with that reason, we're going to bucket it into a category for you. So you don't have to go for every single test case failure in order to find that. So there's many things that we do, but ultimately our analytics platform will aim to lower the amount of effort that you have to manually go through in order to go through all the failure test cases and debug it.
Awesome. Well, I think that's all that we have time for today. If we didn't get to your question, we will reach out to you via email afterwards. So with that, thank you to our audience for your attendance and participation today. And of course, thank you to our presenter, Johnny Lamb. We hope to see you next
Thank you,
time.
Shelby. Thank you, everyone. Take care.